Let's talk education. It's 15 minutes of information about the policies, programs, and activities of our schools and the Ministry of Education. Join us and let's talk education.
Good day, viewers. Welcome to Let's Talk Education. I'm your host, Patrick Evans. Today on Let's Talk Education, our special guest is Magistrate Erwin Moise. Welcome, Magistrate Moise.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Very much so, and we are happy to have you as well.
Yes.
We are going to start off, as you know, we're going to look at some segments of the Education Act.
Yes.
And so my first question to you, Section 37 of the Education Act mandates that it is the parents' duty to ensure that their children attend school regularly.
Yes.
However, in our country, we are faced with challenge of single-parent families.
Yes.
What can be done to ensure that the absent parent plays a role in the child's education and as a consequence is also responsible for the child's attendance?
Yes. In terms of the responsibility, the Act itself defines what a parent is. And so it includes not only persons who are guardians and who have custody of children, but it also includes persons who are liable to maintain the child.
Interesting.
So in our society, for example, you have a lot of single parents, and they are mostly mothers. But the Act ensures that a father who has a liability to maintain the child is also responsible for making sure that that child attends school.
Yes.
And so persons would be, well advised to know what is going on with their children, even if you're not living in the home. I think people are of the mistaken view that once you pay maintenance, that's the end of it. But you have to also make sure that children are attending school and are being taken care of. So in terms of perhaps what can be done at a practical level, I think the schools would do well to have information on both parents, even if only one is a guardian and one lives with the child, and to ensure that both parents are always informed as to what is taking place. So perhaps contact details of the father or the mother who doesn't live in the home can be kept by the school, and regular interaction between these persons and the education institution would go a long way, I think. But under the legislation, the responsibility still falls on the parent, even if he or she is not living in the home.
I see. So for any consequences that may arise,
Yes.
I suppose, both parents
Both
should
parents
be
can
held.
be held liable. Yes.
Okay. If a student accumulates a high number of absences
Yes.
for a school year, the school may take measures to end the truancy under Section 46 and 47 of the Education
Yes.
Act. Apart from monetary fines, as stipulated in Sections 46 and 47, what other sanctions do you think should be imposed?
Well, first of all, I think we need to look at it even beyond just the scope of the sanction. Because ultimately what you want to ensure is that the child is attending school.
Yes.
And so under the Act, I think there's a maximum fine of $1,000.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether the Act can go much further than that. Perhaps the only other sanction you can have apart from a fine is to send someone to prison, which in most circumstances you may not want to do, because essentially I think legislation that deals with education and the maintenance of children try to preserve families as opposed to ripping them apart. So I would say that it has to go beyond just the sanctions, but then you need to look closely at why the child is not attending school. Is it just willful neglect? And then we can invoke perhaps some of the procedures under the Children and Young Persons Act to see whether there is a need to remove that child from the home, for example, which I don't see as a sanction,
Yes,
but really
yes.
as the government stepping into a situation where the child's care and protection is needed.
Most definitely.
So I wouldn't see it as much as trying to sanction any more than the fine, but perhaps trying to find ways around ensuring that that child is actually in school, which is really what the Education Act is designed to do. It's not really a criminal piece of legislation, although the section that deals with that places a criminal sanction, but ultimately it wants to get children into school.
Yes.
And so apart from the fine, you want to look at measures that can be taken to ensure that children are in school, whether if needs be to get these children out of the home situation, if that is what is preventing them. Having said that, I don't think the legislation, the Children and Young Persons Act, is clear enough as to whether lack of education is a ground for removing from the school. I looked at the definition of what negligence is, and it seems to be more in the realm of not providing food, shelter, and clothing. I believe the legislation for children and young persons need to be upgraded.
I
to
see.
include a lack of education as part of the process, where the family court can then be involved.
I agree.
To deal with that sort of situation.
Because it is vital for their upbringing.
Very critical.
Very much as well.
Yes.
So apart from the monetary sanctions, if we are faced where parents just can't afford it,
yes.
Do you think in the future the courts may look at community service?
Well, if it's a question of affordability, then it is really a question of trying to get the sort of assistance that the child actually needs.
Okay.
Community service you normally use for people who have been convicted of a crime. And the magistrate would feel that perhaps instead of sending him to prison or something, maybe we can put him to use.
Yes.
It's used more for people who are unemployed.
Okay.
So maybe in that situation, you can look at having the parents provide some community service to the school.
Okay.
But as I said, I think it's more a question of ensuring that child is in school. If it's a question of a lack of affordability, then there ought to be some sort of social programs to ensure that. I know there are a lot of organizations. I'm a past president of Kiwanis. Who help get children into schools when they lack of books and so forth.
Yes.
And that is what parents need to understand, that keeping them at home is not a response. Poverty is not an excuse for lack of education for children.
It should not be.
So you have to reach out and find ways in which the children can get into school.
Thank you so much, Magistrate Moise. Explain to us what the Education Act states about reasons for being away from school with regard to illness. Would a certificate from a public health institution be acceptable?
Yes, it would be acceptable. Section 38 of the legislation deals with the issue of illness. And it gives illness as one of the reasons that a child can be legitimately out of school. It speaks of illness, it also speaks of physical disability or some form of mental disability that has to be certified by a medical practitioner.
Yes, yes.
So if a medical practitioner certifies, it's not merely certifying that the child is ill, but that the child is ill to the extent that he or she cannot attend school. Because you have to think of whether the illness is something that's contagious, for example, whether other children can contract whatever the child has, whether the child is able to function at school. Having said that, there are occasions when I think it may very well be legitimate to keep the child out of school without a certificate. The child gets up, for example, this morning with a severe headache, you may not have the time to get to the hospital on time. And that, I think, a day or two, I think is a principle might deem it acceptable. But any period much longer than that, you would have to get it certified by a medical practitioner to say that there is an illness, and it is an illness that would prevent the child from functioning properly in school.
Thank you so much. Magistrate Moise, we're about to take a short break, and we'll be returning to continue our discussion. Viewers, you are watching Let's Talk Education with our special guest, Magistrate Erwin Moise. We'll be right back.
Let's Talk Education. It's 15 minutes of information about the policies, programs, and activities of our schools and the Ministry of Education. Join us and let's talk education.
Welcome back, viewers, to Let's Talk Education with our special guest, Magistrate Erwin Moise. Magistrate Moise, Section 50.2 of the Education Act states that corporal punishment is administered where no other punishment is considered suitable or effective. In our early tradition, corporal punishment was seen as a first resort. In this present day, it is seen as a last resort. What do you think would have caused the shift in paradigm?
Well, I mean, people have strong views on corporal punishment. I think education is perhaps more responsible for the change in view. We really came from a tradition where children were supposed to know their place.
That's right.
And even if you have to beat them to get them to know their place, that was how it was done. And personally, I think that children need to be able to express themselves. And sometimes the idea that you can beat a child into behavioral, what's acceptable behavioral standards, or beat them to learn. You know, I can remember growing up that there were times when people would beat children because children didn't understand what was being done. And that is not acceptable because it inhibits, I think, the creativity of the child. And I think we're beginning to realize that children need to be able to express themselves. If I don't understand, I have to say I don't understand, as opposed to being beaten for not understanding. So I think we've changed our perspective because we're more educated as to what works. There's a lot of research done as to what works in terms of education, and we're learning now that you can't beat children into behaving properly, or you can't beat them into being educated. So it's still a last resort. There are those who think that it shouldn't be a resort at all. I will withhold my views on that for various reasons. But but I'm glad that it's seen as a last resort as opposed to the first reaction, especially in our schools.
Yes, I agree to a certain extent. Article 4, Protection of Rights, under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child states, the government have a responsibility to take all available measures to make sure children's rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. What steps do you think our government, especially the Ministry of Education, should consider?
Well, there are many steps. I think we, despite the efforts that we've made, we've still fallen short, I think, in the appreciation of the rights of the child. Where education is concerned, I think the ministry has a significant challenge in that most of the legislation that deals with or that defines a child deals with children from the age of 16 downward.
Yes.
Even in terms of the compulsory school age, we're looking at the year in which that child had turned 15. So we now have 17 and 18-year-olds in our schools who don't even have a right to education and no obligation to be there. Under the convention, that very convention, the age of a child is from 18 down.
It is.
So there's a 2-year gap that we have completely ignored in most of our legislation. And I think the ministry would do well to lobby, I think, the legislatures to amend that to ensure that children from 18 down get the sort of rights that they deserve, especially while they're in our schools. So that's one of the steps that can be taken. I also think that we've not done enough to educate children on their rights.
I think so as well, to a certain extent, because most of them are not aware of their rights.
What are my rights? What can a 14-year-old child do if a parent refuses to send him or her to school? They need to be educated as to what sort of government agencies you can go to, what you can do.
To plead for help.
To plead for help in circumstances where the parents are not taking care of them.
Yes.
So if people are going to have rights, then they need to know what these rights are.
And how to go about
dealing with it and ensuring that their rights are taken care of. So I would say that what needs to be done is to strengthen the legislation.
Yes.
To encompass everybody from 18 and below. And also to educate children on their rights to ensure that they themselves can seek help when their rights are being infringed. And very importantly, people who are working in the system themselves.
They need to know it as well.
They need to know it as well. And parents need to know it as well. I always say that parenting...
All the stakeholders.
Parenting doesn't come with a manual.
Yes.
And most times people are genuinely unaware of what their responsibilities are.
They're doing. So it's a growth process.
Yes.
Magistrate Moise, with the interest of time, we have come to the end of our Let's Talk Education program. It was a pleasure having you on our program
it was my
today.
Pleasure being here.
Very informative, and we hope that it has created thought-provoking to our public at large, so that they could start looking at ways so that we could better facilitate our children, especially through our Education Act.
Yes.
Viewers, you've been watching Let's Talk Education with our special guest, Magistrate Moise. Thank you for viewing, and see you at our next Let's Talk Education.